Hello, hello. Ciao, 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 I guess you could say, everyone, or tutti. Welcome to week 11. The countdown is getting shorter. We are, what, less than 5 weeks away as I record this video, something like that. So not 5 weeks, excuse me, seven, I think we're around 7 weeks away. Um, that's not long, right? So this is less than 2 months. I hope you're all getting excited and getting ready for travel. Some nerves are normal, so don't worry about that. But it is coming soon. So, right around 7 weeks from now, you'll embark on a wonderful experience, perhaps a life-changing experience, certainly the experience of a lifetime. No guarantees, but if you take advantage of everything while we're there, it will be a really great experience. Having just gotten back from Italy a couple weeks ago, I can tell you it's really an amazing place to visit. So I'm really excited for everyone, especially those of you who have not traveled there before, which I believe is everyone. Okay, so the travel is coming soon. A couple of heads, a couple of things to make note of. So our third meeting is on Monday the 10th. So as I record this, it's 2 weeks from now. And so the primary focus of that meeting is for you to present your food or culture or history topic. Again, I give you the choice. If you really don't want to do a presentation, you can do a paper instead. In which case, I'll ask you to just sort of briefly describe the topic, but not do a formal presentation. But you choose either one, paper or presentation. Presentations are nice because then everyone else can learn from you. So I hope that everyone at least prepares something. So that's the 10th. We'll also do some travel prep, and we may need to slip in another meeting in later April, depending on how much we get through in that meeting. But I do want that's the 10th is an important meeting to really start making sure you're ready on the travel, but also to do those presentations. All right. So that's on the 10th. Mark your calendars. Make sure you're there. That's on Zoom. Okay. So this week, what are we doing? We are going to go over food and biodiversity. So these are two really huge topics. You're probably getting tired of me saying that, but these are really big topics, as you can imagine. Biodiversity is something that at least has recently been getting some press. And so it's nice that there's a sort of a wider recognition of the importance of biodiversity. Unfortunately, most of the news is bad news. We are humans are lowering the biodiversity globally in a variety of ways for a variety of reasons, but some of that you'll learn about today. But biodiversity is very, very important. It's what makes life possible, among many, many other things. I assume all of you like to breathe oxygen, and if so, you owe that to biodiversity and plants. And actually, it turns out algae and other phytoplankton actually provide more oxygen than plants per se. But regardless, that's all part of biodiversity. And that oxygen provision is something called an ecosystem service. And we'll learn about that this week. But basically, an ecosystem service is a service provided to humans by nature for obviously for free, right? So nature just provides a lot of things to us. Many of them help or are required for our survival, such as oxygen. But also think about food. You have soil that filters the fresh water. You have bacteria that break down organic material and form that soil, which then allows us to grow plants. You have the sunlight and all the nutrients in the soil that help the plants grow. There's all kinds of things. If you're a hunter or a fisher, you go fishing. I mean, those are all ecosystem services. All of the seafood that we eat, that's an ecosystem service, right? So there's a lot of things that nature does that are very important for um, our life, and if not our survival. And so that's a couple of things we'll go over. Just that's an overview of the basic, some of the importance of biodiversity. And we'll go over food as well. Again, humongous topic. People spend their whole career, academic or professional or otherwise, um, addressing food and food sustainability. Um, there are just so many aspects to this. There's no way we can get through everything in a week, never mind when it's only half the lesson. I mean, this is one of the bigger topics. I've spent a fair amount of time engaged in sustainable food issues, I guess you could say, both on a personal, professional, and an academic level. So something that's near and dear to me. I just think it's just so important, and it's one of those things that people need to eat. Obviously, they need to provide food, and there's just a lot of negative impacts from not having enough food, and but in particular, not having access to fresh, nutritious food, which is a really big problem, in particular in low-income communities. Now, we won't have time to get into things like food deserts, which are areas where it's people don't have reasonably good access to fresh food. They're stuck with like corner stores and canned food, and unfortunately, liquor stores and other things like that, convenience stores that generally don't have the fresh food that is needed for a healthy lifestyle. And so it's just whole snowball effect where I don't have access to food, then you're unhealthy, so you keep eating, this unhealthy food, and it's just kind of this self-defeating spiral. So there's all kinds of issues that we won't get to in the world of food sustainability, but just so you know, there's quite a few more out there. Um, Okay, so I did post this video. I hope you get a chance to watch it. It's about 10 minutes long, and it's about the primarily the impact, the climate impact of the food system, and then how it ties into the agriculture lobby, which is one of the most powerful lobbies in Washington. It's really, really, really powerful. And this video does a really good job of explaining that. Right, and so we have, some overview, some of the things that we're going to do this week. As I said, biodiversity, ecosystem services, the benefits of those two. What are they? And then we'll look at something called monoculture. And let me go into the lesson here. All right, so with biodiversity, we have ecosystem services. We'll briefly mention mass extinction events, and what that means and what's happening there. Um, we'll look at the basic main threats to biodiversity. Here's a hint, it's people. And ecosystem services, as I said. So it's actually not a real long lesson. There's just an introduction to biodiversity and a short video on ecosystem services here, a couple minutes long, and then another one here that provides more detail. All right, and then of course, as usual, I do have the biodiversity summary. So there's actually a lot of important content here. So some of the content is not as much in the reading, but it's just in the presentation. So there's just so you know, there's more information in that presentation than is contained in the readings. And so that's our basic biodiversity lesson. Then we'll go over food and farming, and we'll look at factory farming, um, what's called monoculture, just growing the same crop over very large areas of land. Um, and not only is it often the same species, but in a lot of factory farms, it's that those plants are genetically identical. So they're from down to the gene, the last gene, they are identical. And there's some issues involved with that. That's obviously a lack of biodiversity. That's probably the most stark example of a lack of biodiversity. Just huge, huge. I mean, like hundreds of square miles sometimes of land of just, let's say, corn or soybeans that are genetically identical, which is a complete lack of biodiversity. And they basically use pesticides and herbicides to kill just about everything else around, which kills, destroys the biodiversity as well. Um, and so the purpose there is for you to kind of learn what a factory farm is, what some of the implications are, and compare it to a more biodiverse farm. And to be really clear, this is the way this farming done. I get it. I know folks that are farmers and they use some of these methods. They're great people. They love nature. They love the environment. So this is not meant to point out anyone individually or denigrate, people that are farmers. they're just trying to make a buck like the rest of us. I get it. The problem is with the system and the incentives, the sort of perverse incentives for these farms where, look, if you want to produce food that way, you just have to recognize and could have to pay for all of the negative impacts that result from that. So if you're causing emissions, which is what nitrogen-based fertilizers do when you till them up, when you till the soil, you release carbon out of the soil. So all of those have carbon impacts. Now, yes, they're sequestering carbon in the plants, but then they're releasing carbon and they're releasing these nitrogen into the air, which then forms nitrous oxide, which is a really, really potent greenhouse gas. If you are compromising the biodiversity, which then compromises other aspects of the environment or even the food system. So, for example, if you use a bunch of pesticides, they find out in the US in particular, there's one pesticide called neonicotinoid that it appears to be compromising the ability of bees to survive, so honeybees. And that has negative financial impacts on our food system because honeybees are one of the major um, uh, they're one of the major things that keeps our flowering plants going, right? And so um, the point is we should recognize the impacts and also recognize to see if there's a better way to do things or a more sustainable way to do things. After all, this is, sustainability class. So, um, and so there's some more details here about industrial agriculture. There's a video here that's really interesting. That's about how factory farms, not cornfields and so forth, but factory farms where you have huge numbers of animals like cows and chickens and pigs and so forth in a really small area. Again, this is how animals are largely raised in the United States. So it's just how it is. But the system, again, is one of the things where there are negative impacts of that. You have these waste lagoons that cause pollution. You have just the odor and everything else that's a problem. And this video goes into how that it facilitates superbugs, which are antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which kill people. So there's a negative output or negative outcome that's not paid for by the farms. All of these are externalities. So if you'll notice, a lot of these that I'm referring to are externalities. These are the costs that are externalized to society, and the people that run the farms get all the benefits. It's just the reality. So we have to face reality. Um, and so this video uh, discusses that, the formation of superbugs. This video is a further discussion of the climate impacts of farming. Again, this is something that it's externalized, right? Those costs, the climate costs, are externalized. And there's a little bit about irrigation here as well. There's some different ways to reduce our water use. Um, and then we'll get into some of the solutions, the potential solutions. So regenerative agriculture is becoming a more common practice, I would say globally. It's becoming more and more recognized. I mean, I sort of pay attention to these things and I hear more about regenerative agriculture than I have at any point before. And so it is catching on. And to be clear, this regenerative agriculture, which is it's a way to raise crops more sustainably by sequestering carbon because you don't till the soil, which you don't release the carbon out of the soil. You use organic fertilizers, which actually replenish the soil, natural organic fertilizers. And so they actually make the soil better, whereas factory farming actually kills soil and it actually causes, uh, largely, is responsible for erosion issues as well. It actually destroys the fertility of the soil over time, which is another externalized cost. Um, Whereas regenerative agriculture actually replenishes the soil, it sequesters carbon through a number of ways, and it also seeks to enhance the biodiversity of the local area as opposed to reducing it like factory farming does. So there's a short video, a description about regenerative agriculture as well, which is really important to be aware of. And there's a short article about colony collapse disorder, which is what I mentioned about the honeybees. So these are pesticides that looks like are killing honeybees, which is a big problem, another externality. And then we look at a few of the social impacts of the modern food system. There's a story here, believe it or not, there in the early 2000s and still today, there are actual slaves, like legit slaves, in the agriculture industry in the United States. And I'll let you read the article to find out how and why. And then internationally, as you may imagine, it's if it's a problem here, it's a even bigger problem internationally. And this goes over, in particular, the shrimp industry and how um, that slave labor, like literal slave labor, is used to farm shrimp. Um, okay, so those are the topics this week. As you can see, there's a mixture of some of the identification of problems and some of the potential solutions. So hopefully after you're done, you have a better sense of the sustainability impacts of the modern food system and some of the potential solutions that we have. I mean, there are solutions out there. It's largely a matter of political will, and we have to shift our economic incentives so that they properly reflect the negative impacts of the food system. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. And of course, if you have any questions, let me know.